Blog Talk Radio.
You are now listening to True Murder, the most shocking killers in true crime history, and the authors that have written about them. Gacy, Bundy, Dahmer, The Night Stalker, BTK. Every week, another fascinating author talking about the most shocking and infamous killers in true crime history. True Murder, with your host, journalist and author, Dan Zupansky. Good evening, this is your host Dan Zupansky for the program True Murder, the most shocking killers in true crime history, and the authors that have written about them. It was a night of celebration for the Whitaker family. Their son Bart was graduating from college, but when Bart's brother Kevin opened his door to their house, a masked intruder shot him point blank. His mother took the next bullet, followed by Mr. Whitaker and Bart. Blood was everywhere, but somehow Bart and his family survived. His father survived. To the cops, the story didn't add up, however, and their investigation discovered a stunning web of lies. Bart was living a double life. He hadn't been enrolled in college since his freshman year. Instead of attending classes, he'd spent his days playing video games with his friends, while planning to murder his family to inherit their $1 million estate. Savage Son takes us inside this chilling murder case to reveal the twisted motives of a seemingly all-American boy next door who turned into a cold-blooded killer, now residing on death row. My special guest this evening is author Corey Mitchell. Thank you very much for agreeing to this interview, and welcome to the program, Corey Mitchell.
Dan, how you doing, sir? I appreciate you having me on.
Well, thank you very much for agreeing to this interview. It's a great pleasure for us and for me and the audience to have you on our program tonight. So,
hey, I'm looking forward to talking to you about this book and learning more about you and what you're doing in your true crime writing as well. So.
Oh, well, thanks very much for that. Let's get down to this savage murder. Of all the murder cases you could have chosen, and there's so many interesting cases, why did you decide to write about this particular case?
I've been writing a lot of books about serial killers and big mass murders in Texas, and I needed to change a pace. I'm completely fascinated by serial killers, but I just wanted something a little bit different. I wanted something that involved, just like your introduction said, the all-American boy. You know, how does the all-American kid who seemingly went down a similar path in life that I went down, as a matter of fact, I even grew up about 20 minutes away from where the murders occurred. I grew up in Pearland, and this is in Sugarland. And, Bart Whitaker was raised in a family almost like I was raised in a town almost like I was raised in. And so that alone made me curious to want to know more about this guy who had everything handed to him on a silver platter, yet he still just was not satisfied with everything he was given and decided to resort to not only murder, but murder of his entire family, his loved ones, people that really adored him and gave him everything that he wanted. And to me, that was just very fascinating. It's very different than the mindset of a serial killer. So I wanted to dig deeper into that. And of course, like I said, the fact that it was so close to where I grew up always makes it interesting to learn about the things that happen around you. And when you're familiar with the surroundings, it just makes it that much more interesting and bizarre to find out about it. So yeah, that was the number one reason on that. And then the second one was that this is a much more high-profile case than what I usually take on.
Right.
I tend to take on cases that go under the radar. I mean, Coral Eugene Watts in my book Evil Eyes, even though he's probably the most prolific serial killer in the history of the United States, most people were not even aware of him. So I wanted to really dig in and expose, Coral Watts and let everybody know about him. But this one is just a little different. It actually had been covered on 48 Hours first. And it had an hour-long special in the case. I found it very fascinating watching that case. I followed the case in the news before it aired on 48 Hours, so I was already aware of it. And I just thought, I wanted to try something a little bit different, something a little bit more high-profile, just to see, something that's not completely saturating the airways, though, like, Casey Anthony case or a Nathan Holloway case. Those just hold no interest to me at all. most cases just get overdone, overblown, overanalyzed, over-talking-headed by the so-called experts out there. But this one just had enough, that there was just enough national interest, but it still was interesting to me to be able to get that story out to people. So like I said, it's very different than what I normally write. But
right.
I thoroughly enjoyed the process of taking on a different type of case like this. And it's,
Now,
it's such a bizarre case that, how can you not be fascinated by it?
Oh, absolutely, it is. It is an incredible case. Now, tell us a little bit, go back a little bit, to tell us a little bit about this, where this story primarily takes place. And you talked about a place called Sugar Land, Texas, very close to Houston, Texas. And also tell us a little bit more about Bart's family. You talked about they doted on him. Tell us, were they a wealthy family? You said they spoiled him, but were they a wealthy family? Tell us a little bit more in your research for this book, what you found out what Bart's life was like with his father Kent, his mother Tricia, and his brother Kevin. What was their life really like?
Yeah, Sugar Land, the town is just a small suburb of Houston. And what it's basically occurred over time is, well, first of all, it's built on money from the Imperial Sugar Company. So that's where the name Sugar Land comes from. Sugar Land back when I was a kid living in Pearland, Sugar Land was, very small. Didn't really have a whole lot going on. Then all of a sudden, a lot of the pro sports athletes from Houston started to move out there. Like Hakeem Olajuwon, I believe, had a house out there. A lot of the Houston Astros had moved out there. Back then, the Houston Oilers, and then now they're known as the Houston Texans. A lot of these guys with a lot of money had started to move out there. And then there was a certain amount of flight from the city of Houston and all the crime that was occurring in Houston from people. So they were moving out to Sugar Land, where it was, quiet, suburb, very, very low key, just not a lot of nonsense going on, not a lot of criminal activity. And you combine that quiet, cottagey feeling, neighborhoods feel, along with this extra amount of money coming in, and that's kind of the direction that Sugar Land turned, which was more money was coming into the town, and subsequently it became a very affluent suburb of the city of Houston. And within that realm of nice little neighborhoods was the Whitaker family. By most Sugar Lake standards, they were not super wealthy. By the average American, they were very much so. I mean, they were doing extremely well. They lived in a very nice home, basically, what they call McMansions out here, and
right.
basically pushing close to $1 million for, which to people out in the Northeast and in California, that doesn't sound like a lot of money. But the housing prices in Texas have always been incredibly low. So
right.
$1 million houses in Texas are probably worth about $3 or $4 million in Los Angeles, just to kind of give you an idea. So yeah, they did extremely well, and really not on any fancy jobs. Basically, Kent was working in an accounting department for his wife's husband's construction company, and then Tricia, the mother, was working as a teacher at one of the nearby schools. So they weren't these really wasn't a CEO of a major company,
right.
or Mary Kay Cosmetics multi-dollar regional saleswoman or anything like that. They
Sure.
just had seemingly normal jobs, but they did very well at their jobs. They were very conservative with their money. They held tightly to it, and they made smart investments. And they really just put all that money into a very nice home, and also to, as I said, doting on their children, on their two sons, Bart and Kevin. And by that, Bart Whitaker, when he was in college, he had his full college paid for. He was given a $100,000 condominium on the lake, and he had a $35,000 SUV. So not bad when you're in your early 20s and you've got everything covered for you. So so that's financially, and then emotionally as well. Now, Bart Whitaker will tell you a different story. He'll tell you that his father didn't really pay enough attention to him. His mother paid more attention to his younger brother Kevin because Kevin was a worse student, and therefore he needed more attention. But the reality is quite the opposite. Bart really, really was paid attention to by his father, and his dad really cared about Bart, and the two spent time training on bikes together. They rode what's called the MS 150. It's a ride for multiple sclerosis that I've even ridden in about 7
right.
where you ride 150 miles. In their case, would be from Houston to Austin. So that takes a lot of training on bikes, hours and hours and hours on the bikes that Kent spent with his son, and taught him the ways trying to teach him ways of business, and they had sit-down dinners, everything you would think in a good family. And same with the mother too. Tricia really doted on Bart and really tried to give as much attention to both of her boys and as much love to both of her boys as well. And also another aspect of the Whitaker family's religion played a very, very strong part in their lives. And
they were a very religious family?
Very religious, not over the top, but just they always made sure they were at church every weekend. Kent Whitaker, the father, his brother, was actually in the ministry as well at, I believe, a Baptist church near the area. And so it was a very important aspect of their life that religion and faith was to be talked about in the family and discussed and shared with friends and family. And that was I think that's probably one of the key points for Bart, is that he was actually seemingly turned off by a lot of that when he was younger. And I think that probably caused a lot of consternation in the household, or at least from his perspective, that he thought his parents were browbeating him with religion. As a matter of fact, he even went to Baylor University in Waco, Texas, which is known as mainly a Baptist school. And a lot of the students there go further into the ministry, and then it also just plays a very big part of that social, that campus life as well, religion. And that was another thing you mentioned earlier, how Bart, who somehow pulled the wool over his parents' eyes all this time, convincing them that he was graduating from college, and in reality, he didn't even have enough credits to be considered a sophomore. He spent a lot of his time at Baylor, where he first started college, smoking pot and playing video games, and playing EverQuest with his roommates, hours and hours on end. And instead of going to his classes, instead of getting a job to help support his income, he just basically got high and played video games. And I think a lot of that was because he was kind of sick of all these religious hypocrite, as he called them, religious hypocrite students at Baylor. Right.
Now, before we get into the, you've got us to the point where he is fooling around in school, unbeknownst to his parents, who are paying the incredible tab and have all these great expectations for their son. What was Bart Whitaker ever seen by any psychiatric or mental health professionals, and did he have any legal problems during his adolescence, or any events where he was seen by any, again, psychiatric experts or mental health professionals?
Yeah, Bart started off normal kid, good kid, going to school, making decent grades, and then he got into high school, and then he started to get bored. And what he would do was convince some of his buddies that, hey, we should go up to these schools of ours and start robbing them and taking things out. And he was really fascinated by computers, so he would convince a couple of his buddies from school that we'd go in, sneak into the campus, climb up on top of the roof, break in through a skylight, almost like a Mission Impossible mission, and then lower themselves down in, go in and steal as many computers as they could, and then take off. And then they stored them in a storage shed. He didn't even resell them. He didn't pawn them off, and he actually didn't even really use them. It was more just the thrill of going in and stealing things. And to make it even more bizarre is that one of the schools he stole from was the school where his mother taught.
Right.
Needless to say, it just devastated Tricia Whitaker, that her son, who was supposed to be this great kid and all-American boy, goes in to steal from her own school. She was so devastated by Bart's actions that she stopped shopping at the grocery store that she used to shop at all the time. She stopped going to the same church that she went to because she was so embarrassed that she thought all of the people there would be talking about what her son did. The good old Bart is actually a bad boy. And based on these several thefts, that when he got caught and got in trouble, he was sent to a couple of different doctors, actually, for psychiatric evaluation. And ironically, the two reports couldn't have been much different from one another. One report said that this guy is deranged, he is narcissistic, he's over the top, he is going to be nothing but trouble for everybody involved with him. And the recommendation was that this guy should not be allowed back in school. He he should be sent to jail and locked away and have the key thrown away. The other report, also by another doctor there in Sugar Land, was the total opposite. Was that Bart made a bad choice. He's a good kid. Really, you have nothing to be afraid of. And so, of course, the parents tended to ignore the first report and focus more on the second, and think that, oh, this is Bart. He's a good guy. He didn't mean to do this. He's bored. He's trying to have some fun, and it was a bad way of expressing his desire to do that. And that's kind of it's there in black and white. It's kind of scary that one guy nailed it so perfectly, that one of the doctors nailed it. That this is basically a deranged sociopath who's going to end up harming himself and other people as well.
Yeah, it's an interesting early assessment for sure. Must have been some obvious signs, at least to him, to make that type of big assessment. Now, you're talking about him being in college, and he doesn't even have enough credits to graduate potentially. And you do talk about in the book that he often talked to people around him, his friends, which were at a higher socioeconomic status. Kids were well off, at least compared to a lot of people. Not the people you would typically think of that he might discuss this sort of thing. What was he discussing much earlier than his graduation date? Take us back into college and some of his friends, and what was the kind of conversations he was having with these friends?
In his first year in college at Baylor, what he would do with his buddies who would, instead of going to class or going to his classes, would be sitting around smoking pot, playing video games. They would jokingly start talking about what would be the best way to kill your family. And, Bart would always be the one to bring that up. And he would ask one of his classmates, one of his dorm mates, and say, how could I kill my family? How could I do this and get away with it? And, of course, here they are. They're smoking pot. They're getting drunk. They're just having fun. And they're just playing along with Bart. They think, oh, he's just being stupid, and, why not? So they would sit around and actually dream up fantasies about how they would kill Bart's parents. And, for the other people involved, it was just a joke, and they just played, in their minds, they were just playing along with it. And Bart was basically, what he was doing while he was throwing these little seeds out was that he was gauging people. He was seeing, okay, how would these people react when I bring up such a morbid topic? Are they going to be afraid of me? Are they going to think that this is interesting? Are they going to want to participate in something like this? So he was actually sitting there scouting people. It was almost like an NBA scout going down to the high school playground or the junior high school playground and seeing what the talent is. And this is what Bart was basically doing, was figuring out who he could bring into his web to actually help him kill his family. And this, like we said, this occurred early on in his college career, and it went on for a number of years. And eventually, like you were talking about too, Dan, is that not only were the majority of these people that he was speaking with in a higher economic stratum, but also intelligent kids as well. Some of these kids were National Merit Scholarship Award winners, which means they're basically the cream of the crop. Just highly intelligent people, that were not going to school just to party. They were going to learn about microbiology, and they were going to learn about nanotechnology and all of these scientific-based education tracks that they take. And,
unlikely candidates for this sort of thing, for sure.
Seemingly, exactly. You would think it would just be somebody that is kind of a low-life scum. Would be the person to be a trigger man in a murder, in a hit job. But these were not. These were the cream of the crop. They were the good kids. And Bart had the ability to find these kids and spot, and just, spot something there, some helplessness, some pain in their life. There was something missing in those people's lives that he was able to hone in on and determine that could be a guy that would actually pull a trigger and kill my parents for me.
Now, to all the critics, or not the critics, but say a skeptic or someone that is listening right now and saying, well, yeah, but this is just talk. He's smoking a bunch of weed. He's talking to his buddies. Obviously, his buddies didn't take it very seriously. Or the very first time that he mentioned something like that, they went to the police and then they would have wired up his friends or something like you see on TV. But tell our audience what evidence you have that this was not just a conversation. You spoke about some other plots. Well, how far did he go in plotting the death other than smoking weed and talking with his friends?
As Bart would instigate these conversations and gauge the response and the reactions of his friends, he started to see, okay, this guy is actually listening to what I'm saying and is responding to me and is not calling the cops and is not afraid of me and is not calling me a deranged psychopath. So
Right.
He would start to hone in further, and then the conversations would taper off for a week or two, and then he'd bring it up again, and they'd see how the reaction was, and if they still weren't running away to the hills after he brought this up, he would continue on and pursue it. And eventually, after several months of this, two of his closest roommates, he actually convinced that, okay, we're actually going to do this. And he had just hit, nothing super dramatic. I mean, it wasn't laid out. This is exactly how we're going to do it. It was just almost this continuation of this stoner talk. But somehow within a few months, he was able to convince these people that, hey, we're actually going to go down to Sugar Land, Texas, all the way from Waco, and we're going to go and kill my parents. And it actually occurred in 3 different occasions before Bart was actually successful in murdering his parents. And each time that it happened, it seemed, and I tell people this, there's almost a dark sense of humor throughout the book when Bart's actually trying these murder cases or trying to actually commit the murders of his families. And as I said before, this is no disrespect intended towards Kevin or Tricia Whitaker or anybody involved in this crime, because it's not funny, it's not humorous, but the idiocy involved on Bart's side of what he was trying to do, it's almost like a bad Keystone Cop movie or something. This moronic bad guy, because one of the times when he actually sent the guys down to murder his parents, he had said, okay, you're going to go in, I'm going to take my parents out to dinner, you're going to go into the house, I'm going to turn off the alarm system, you're going to raise up this window, crawl in, shut the window, and wait for my family. Well, Bart had all that set up. He actually drove down. This is about 2 or 3 years before the murders actually occurred.
Okay.
He did the same exact scenario. We came in, he took his parents out to dinner. Parents came, his buddies then were to go in, sneak in the house. Well, one time Bart forgets to turn off the alarm. So the guys are going in there all dressed up in black, and he goes in to lift up the window, and the alarm system goes off. So they had to run up, and they actually take off all the way to Waco. And then about a year later, a totally different set of guys were involved in this, and same situation. Bart's going to go down to Sugar Land. He's going to meet the guys there. They're going to go the same process. Well, he sets one of his buddies up in a stolen car to get out of town, but he forgets to fill up the tank with gasoline. So here they are. This guy's ready to drive all the way down to Sugar Land, and he's in his car driving away and gets outside of Waco. And if you've ever driven from Waco down to Sugar Land, at night there's almost no lights for about 50 miles. So he gets out of Waco. There's no lights, there's no gas stations, there's nothing. This guy runs out of gas on his way down there. And to make matters even worse on that particular case is that one of his helpers, former friend, a female friend, had found out what they were going to do, and she actually called the police. She's the only person out of all these people. There's probably about 9 different potential murderers involved, and only one person who was a friend of these groups actually called the cops and said, hey, these guys are going to come down and kill this family. And what had happened was this girl had called the police down in Sugar Land, or actually in Waco, who then contacted the police in Sugar Land, who then contacted the Whitaker family. And so here this guy, this buddy of Bart, is driving. He runs out of gas, and all of a sudden he's sitting there about 3 in the morning. He gets a phone call from Kent Whitaker, Bart Whitaker's dad. And he's sitting there waiting for Bart to bring him gas for a gas tank for his gas or for his vehicle. And he gets a call from the guy he's about to go down and kill. and Kent Whitaker says, so are you coming down to kill us? Jokingly, he says, well, we hear you're coming down to kill us. That's got to be a joke. I mean, they're all laughing about it. It's just a joke. And so, needless to say, that particular plot failed. Bart, and in that particular instance too, Bart, once his parents had found out, Bart actually took off and fled to Dallas and ran away for about 3 days. And so you would think that, okay, this guy, if he's innocent, he wouldn't run away. So why is he running away? That would start to actually spark some concern by the Whitakers that maybe there's something wrong with their kid. That why are we getting a phone call? So that's those two of the plots, and the third plot was a different scenario altogether, which was that Bart was going to corral his entire family, which would be cousins and nieces and nephews, into lake house, a family lake house, and set the house on fire. And Bart was going to heroically escape from the house, slightly burned, but he would be the sole survivor. That everyone else would burn inside the house, and that was, the excuse that the prosecution used, or the motive that the prosecution argued, was that Bart was doing this for money, that he was mainly interested in collecting life insurance from his mother and his father and his brother, and probably well over $1 million. And this is what he was vaguely telling his cohorts, that he was going to give them some money. And unfortunately for him, when the actual murders took place, the mother was killed, as you said. The brother was killed, but Kent Whitaker, the father, was not killed. So all of this whole ridiculous scenarios that Barty created, and allegedly for money, was all hinging on the fact that both the parents had to die, and that they were not successful in killing the father, thus meaning Bart's not going to get any money. So it's bizarre.
Incredible.
It is. It's so bizarre too. So.
Now tell us, Corey, about the day in question. Tell us about the whole day. I mean, give us the whole background. He's about to graduate. It's a big, it's an important event. It's a big celebration. Take us back to that day and everything that happens, the sequence of events, please.
Oh, and you've nailed it on the head, is that this is Bart Whitaker, who has convinced his parents that he's actually graduating from college. And as I said earlier, he did not even have enough credits to be considered a sophomore, much less a graduating senior in college. And Bart, of course, had started his college off at Baylor University in Waco. It did poorly, and so had to transfer to Sam Houston State, which is considered a good college, but slightly lower level as far as the reputation that it has.
Sure.
They do, however, have a fairly internationally renowned criminal justice department.
Ironically
enough. So, basically Bart had told his parents, hey, I've been going to college all this time. I'm doing great. I'm graduating in 4 years. I want to come down before Christmas starts, and let's go out, the night before my graduation ceremony, and let's celebrate. And, of course, the Whitakers are just ecstatic. Here's their number one firstborn son. He's graduating from college. He had troubles in high school with the law, but he's worked through all that. He's done really well. We're just so excited for him. So they, of course, let's get the family together. Let's surprise Bart with a great gift, and that gift turns out to be a $4,000 Rolex watch, which
nice,
great graduation gift for a young upstarting kid. And it's ironic too, because there's a lot of photographs that were taken in the house that night of Bart opening his gifts. And in one of the photographs, which I don't even know that I even talked about in the book, but I've actually posted this photograph online a few times. Bart and his brother Kevin are sitting in front of the fireplace, and Bart's just got this grin on his face, like he knows something's really interesting is about to happen. And Kevin is sitting next to him. He just looks so happy for his brother. But if you look really, it's very, very clear. You can look down at Bart's right hand on his right thigh. He's shooting the bird at his brother.
Really?
And it's just, boom, flipping his brother off. It's a very telling photograph. And like I said, I didn't put it in the book, but I have put that out there so people could see it, because it's pretty, here's this guy. He knows exactly what's going to go down in a few hours. And basically what is going to go down is the same plan that the same plot that he's planned years in advance, which is he's going to take mom, dad, and brother out to a nice restaurant, or they're going to take him out. They're going to be celebrating his impending graduation the following night. And while they're at the restaurant, one of his buddies is going to sneak into the house. The other buddy is going to actually go to the restaurant and wait in the parking lot to follow them back. And that person is the getaway driver as well, and that's Chris Brashear, was the masked gunman, and Stephen Champagne was the driver. And these are two nice, good-looking young boys, about 24, 25 years old, who lived near Bart in a place called it's actually Bentwater near Lake Conroe. They worked with Bart at a fancy country club restaurant that Bart was the restaurant manager at. And, good kids,
right.
Good background. Stephen Champagne's a Marine. You would think, okay, these are decent kids. And,
sure.
Again, these were just two more pawns in Bart's game of murdering chess on his family that he had brought into the fold that were going to do his dirty work for him. And that's exactly what happened. Bart and the family drove a few miles away from their house to a very nice seafood restaurant called Pompano, where they were treated very well. They were given a celebratory cake and having drinks and eating all kinds of delicious seafood. And meanwhile, Chris is sneaking in the house. He's wearing all black, dressed like a ninja. And Stephen Champagne's in the parking lot of Pompano to keep an eye on the family, to track them, to basically be a heads-up phone call guy to Chris when the family was coming back, so Chris would be ready to go ahead and shoot the family. And the Whitakers eat. They take off. It's still relatively early when they started eating, and they got back at the house at a fairly decent hour, but it was definitely dark outside. They drive into their neighborhood, just very quiet neighborhood, nice houses. They're fairly close to one another, and they pull into the driveway, and Kevin darts out of the car. He always likes to be the first one to open the door, and so he makes his way to the front door. His mom, Trish, is following right behind him. Kent Whitaker, the dad's right behind her, and Bart's behind all three of them. And as Kevin walks to the front door, Bart says, "Dad, I'm going to go out to the street and check my cell phone. I left it in the car." He wanted to hear from his fiancée, or his girlfriend at the time, and give her a call. So the three Whitaker family members are going to the front door. Bart is walking in the opposite direction out to the street to his car. Kevin Whitaker walks up to the door, has a key, unlocks the front door, and the second he walks in, it's just immediately a gunshot. And he falls down right there in the foyer. His mother's screaming bloody murder. She's like, "Oh, my God," she's screaming. She immediately runs in to Kevin's aid, and she gets shot. And then here's Kent Whitaker, the father, the husband, and he hears all these pops. And, of course, gunfire just doesn't exist in this neighborhood. So
sure.
Obviously something is amiss. He runs in. He gets shot, and he's shot in the shoulder. He turns around, falls, and he starts bleeding profusely. Bart hears all the commotion and makes a mad dash through the front yard, sees his dad lying down bleeding, sees his mother, literally jumps over his mom and his dead, basically now already almost his dead brother, and runs into the living room right next to the kitchen and tackles the intruder, the man in the black mask and dress and everything. Tackles the guy, knocks the gun out, and the guy gets away. The guy runs out the back, the back door, goes to the backyard through and jumps over a fence, goes through a neighbor's yard, jumps into the getaway car, and takes off. And Bart somehow manages to call 911. 911 gets out there, and by the time they already arrive, his brother is dead. Patricia Whitaker is actually still alive, but she's basically hanging on by a thread. And she immediately gets what they call life flight helicopters out here in Texas. And it's emergency helicopters. These are people that are dying. They need to be lifted up and taken to a hospital right away.
Sure.
Kevin and Patricia both were life flighted out in two separate helicopters. Kent, the father, however, is basically coherent. He's in severe pain, as is Bart, who was shot as well. Bart also took a bullet to the shoulder. And so the oldest Whitaker men are still doing okay. They're cognizant. They can talk. Patricia and Kevin, however, Kevin basically is dead. Patricia is, however, alive but needs immediate attention. Well, she actually does not even make it to the hospital. She died in transit to the hospital. And, of course, Kent did not find this out until a little bit later once he was transferred up to the hospital as well. But yeah, Kent and Bart both were winged or wounded pretty. Kent more so was wounded very badly. Bart was just kind of winged with a bullet. But he was coherent enough that he could actually talk to the police and try to give them a description. Now, he described the shooter. He couldn't obviously see the skin or the face or the hands or anything of the shooter, but he told a police officer that the voice of the shooter sounded like a black man.
Okay.
So,
Now you had incredible access, or you had very good access to be able to write this book from authorities, from the people that prosecuted this case. You had some access to those people. In your research, what did the police initially think when they assessed the crime scene, or shortly after anyway, with Bart's story, with everything that they saw? What was initially their reaction, and what was initially the media's reaction? Did they portray Bart as some kind of hero or would-be hero? Tell me the assessment of the police, and tell me how the media reported on this initially.
The police, you're talking about a town where almost no one gets murdered. Barely any crimes committed. I mean, we're talking maybe some cars getting, stealing some cars, maybe some broken windows, teenage hooliganism, that kind of stuff.
Sure.
Murder almost never exists in this town. So when this first happened, Detective Marshall Slott was actually the head of this case, and it's bizarre because the creation that Bart wanted to have of the crime scene was that this is obviously a robbery gone bad that turned into a murder. And so what Bart had told Chris Brashear is, when you go into the house, pull out some dresser drawers, pull out some clothes out of these drawers, ransack the place, make it look like you've been rifling through all these drawers, that you're going through looking for jewelry, for money, for anything. Make it look like a crime had been committed, a robbery had been committed first before the murder. And again, this kind of goes to that dark humor, the goofiness factor of this case. And again, I don't mean to be. I'm not trying to be too light about it, but
no, I understand.
Chris Brashear actually went in the parents' bedroom, and then also in a hallway to a bathroom where there were these different dressers. And you would think, okay, you're going to pull these dressers out, and you're going to just you're actually going to pull entire drawers out on some of them, or you're going to pull them out and everything's going to be pulled out. Every single drawer was pulled out almost the exact same length. So it's like you have 10 drawers, they're pulled out about 1.5 inches. Every single one of them, or 3 inches here. So it wasn't even enough to be able to pull it out and toss everything around. And immediately Marshall Slott, the detective, walks in and he sees this. He's like, this is a joke. This can't be a robbery. This is some idiot's idea of a prank, and his prank's just gone horribly wrong. So the detective immediately thinks something is up. Now, he doesn't really know that it's Bart until, or I should say, he doesn't really even start thinking that it's Bart until just a couple of days, well, probably about the next day or 2 days after, when Bart and Kent Whitaker are in the hospital. Detective Slott is putting out phone calls to different people. He wants to find out, anything he can about the Whitakers, anything that might help him. And what he finds out, of course, is that Bart was down for his graduation ceremony. Well, he being Marshall Slott, called Sam Houston State and wanted to find out, is Bart Whitaker actually graduated from college?
Why did he do that? Why did he do that, though?
He's just being a good detective, I guess.
Okay.
Maybe he assumed that he was, maybe he just thought he could find somebody there that might have known Bart or something. He's never really said flat out why he did that. He goes, that was just, that's why Bart was down. So my instinct was to just contact the school just to double check. And sure enough, he got a phone call the next day and said, no, Bart Whitaker's not graduating from college here. As a matter of fact, he can't even be a sophomore here yet. So no way he's going to graduate. So immediately, bing, light bulb moment, everything goes off. Sure. And Marshall Slott confronts Bart in the hospital, separate from his dad, and says, Bart, why'd you lie to my guys? Why did you lie to me? You're not graduating. And then he hummed and hawed, and he just said he told his parents that because he didn't want to embarrass himself. He didn't want his parents to find out that he was actually a bad student, he was not going to graduate, that he had been spending all their money all this time. So he had lied to the police officers the night before about graduating. So, obviously,
looks like a motive.
This looks really, really bad. Marshall Slott thinking that. But he can't pin it down. He can't pin anything down. And miracle of miracles, the day after that, a gentleman by the name of Adam Hipp, who happened to be one of Bart's earlier pawns in these previous failed murder plots, had saw about the murders on the internet and had read about the case and the details that were given out in the media. He felt like, man, this is exactly what Bart was trying to tell me, was trying to convince me to do 3 years ago. And actually, Adam Hipp actually went down and was one of those guys that was down there driving, as was going to be an original getaway driver. And Adam Hipp, there's some debate as to whether he actually had some consciousness raising and he was ready to do the right thing, or if he was just interested in getting the reward money.
Okay.
But he came forward. He was living in Dallas at the time. He drove all the way down to Sugar Land, met Marshall Slott, and told him, this is a plot that Bart Whitaker wanted me to do 3 years ago to kill his family. I think this is exactly what he probably did here. And so Marshall Slott, even though he knows Bart lied about his college graduation, even though he's got Adam Hipp telling him flat out this guy has plotted this before, he still didn't have any proof all this time. So he's, over a period of months, it actually takes him almost 7 months to finally get enough evidence and get enough information to at least go forward and start putting turning the screws on Bart. And right as he is about to make his move and come in for the arrest, Bart gets wind of it and takes off to Mexico.
Now,
he takes off for almost a year and a half.
Now tell us about how the police start putting the screws on Bart Whitaker, and how on earth did he get wind of it? How did he actually be so convinced, and then he was correct, I assume, that they were close to an arrest, and that caused him to take off to Mexico. So tell us first what the police did, and then tell us how Bart figured out that they were going to make an arrest.
Adam Hipp, the same guy who was Bart's friend who was involved in a previous murder plot, who had come forth to Officer Slott,
right?
He actually went even further in helping the police and said, basically they said, we want to put a wire on you.
Okay.
And we want to wire your phones, and we want you to reinstigate your friendship with Bart, because Adam had actually grown up in Sugar Land with Bart. They met actually in high school, but they had become friends. Adam would actually come over to Bart's house, where they had a little gym set up in their upstairs portion of the house, and the two would work out together. They were both very elitist as far as their belief that they were economically superior than other people from their town. And so their weightlifting sessions would consist of talking about how smart they were, and how brilliant they were, and how much money they were going to make. And then eventually, even back then, Bart started talking to Adam Hipp, telling him how much he didn't like his parents and how much he really just didn't care for his parents. And Adam Hipp never could understand that, because he just saw a loving family the whole time. So those guys had known each other for a while. Adam, now in the present tense, at least in 2003, was in Dallas. He was working at a bank. He was doing very well, but he came down, talked to the police, agreed to do what they wanted to basically pin this on Bart. And it took several meetings between Bart and Adam. Bart, however, was very smart in the sense that he always felt like Adam's questions were a little bit too contrived. Right. Didn't really sound like Adam. And so he tended to be more evasive when answering Adam's questions about the murders, because Adam would come out, well, Bart, what happened, man? Is this, what happened to your parents? Is this what happened when, the same, it almost sounds like exactly what you wanted us to do. And Bart would never really come out and answer anything whenever Adam had the wire on. So this kind of went on for a while, but then what the police had instructed Adam Hipp to do was, look, we are gonna turn the screws on Bart. We want you to basically tell Bart, if you don't pay me a certain amount of money, I'm gonna go tell the cops what had happened before. So what they did was they set up a post office box up in Dallas, Texas, and it was basically a hush money box office fund or post office box that Bart would be sending money to Adam Hipp, basically to keep his mouth shut. And he would send it under the name of Kaiser Soze. I'm not sure if you've ever seen the movie The Usual Suspects.
Yes, I did, yes. Oh, yes.
Okay, so, great story. Well, that's actually Bart's favorite movie. He just loves this movie, and he envisions himself as Kevin Spacey, as Kaiser Soze, the ultimate mastermind criminal. And so here he is sending money to Adam Hipp to the P.O. box that the police set up in Dallas, Texas, with the name K. Soze, and using his actual return address. And these are basically, here's your hush money, the hush money fund. And so that was the first thing that they said, okay, we've got this. And then some of the recordings also were, the phone recordings, the wiretap ones weren't all that great, but then the phone ones were a little bit more telling, even though they weren't completely explicit that he killed them. But they felt, at that point, then they felt that they had enough. And then you said, well, how did Bart get wind of it? Basically, it was his intuition. He could tell. I mean, no one flat out came and said, Bart, the cops are coming for you. But he could tell by the way Adam kept acting that something was going down. If he's threatening to tell the cops, he might do it anyway. And he just it's kind of bizarre, really, because what happened with Bart after the murders is that, he was living about an hour north of Sugar Land at the time. After the murders, he came back to the house where his family was killed and moved in with his dad.
Sure.
Even though here he is, he'd orchestrated this murder, and he's willing to go right back and live in his home. And his dad, again, very religious man, spent the next 7 months basically healing with Bart, and unbeknownst to him, not knowing that his son had been responsible for killing his wife and his youngest son. Here he is basically trying to minister to his own son that, through Christ and through religion and through the Bible and through these religious-based homes, we can find salvation and we can continue on with our lives. And that's a big part of the story, too, is that the night of the murders, Kent Whitaker, the father, actually forgave the shooters and forgave the killers that night.
He had an epiphany in the hospital, you said.
Absolutely. And he just realized that he could not carry the anger, the rage, a grudge against the people that shot his family because it would destroy him, and that would not be within his religious calling. So really, again, I've talked about this to people that I could never do that. If somebody whacked my entire family, I would be lividly insane and enraged, and that's exactly what he's saying not to be. And so it's extremely admirable. I don't know if it's extremely realistic for most people, but it's definitely something to be admired by a lot of people. And I just, I don't know how he could do that. But here he is living in his home with this, walking across the entrance into the house every night where your wife and your kid has been killed, or you're, being Bart, knowing that you were responsible for that, and living under this guise of, hey, I love my dad and life's great and he's teaching me about God and I'm gonna live a better, more healthy, God-fearing lifestyle. And 7 months into it, all of a sudden he just starts getting these intuitions. He starts feeling the pressure from Adam Adam Hipp that that Adam might go and talk to the cops. And all of a sudden he just decides he's ready to hightail it. He gets $10,000 from his dad. His dad doesn't really know what's going on. He gets one of his coworkers at a restaurant that he works at to drive him to Mexico, or at least to the border, and to where then that he would move in with the family. And he ends up going to Mexico, bleaching his hair blonde, telling the locals that he's actually an Iraqi war veteran.
Oh,
his wound from the shooting was actually from a firefight in Afghanistan, I believe. And he befriends a young girl, and she falls in love with him and convinces her daddy that he's a great guy, so he ends up getting a job at her daddy's furniture store. He just leads this whole new lifestyle for almost a year and a half. And you're talking about, well, did the press see him as a hero? They didn't really focus on that too much in the press in the beginning with the shootings. But ironically, when he went to Mexico, he actually supposedly saved the life of a girl who was drowning. There was a flood that had come through, and he allegedly saved this little girl's life. So he was actually a hero to a lot of the Mexican families down there.
They might have to look. They might want to look into that one though.
Yeah, well, he survived. She survived.
No, but with his tendency to set up things for his own.
There you go.
Who knows?
It make him look good,
Yeah.
It's probably a perfect exam or thing to do. So look into that. So
how was he returned from Mexico? Was he extradited? What was the circumstances?
Yeah, basically, in cases like that, Mexico doesn't extradite potential death row candidates back to Texas, because Texas is just like, hey, you're in Texas, you kill somebody, capital murder, you're toast.
Sure.
And Mexico is very against the death penalty. Well, in this particular case, it didn't work out. The authorities in Sugar Land contacted the Mexican authorities, and they basically told them what had happened, and that this guy's been pulling a ruse over your people for the last year and a half. And they actually kindly escorted Bart back across the border.
Wow.
Surprisingly, after almost 18 months out there in Mexico. And and then at that point, Bart, from that point, then it's all pretty much boilerplate. And what happens is that Bart gets arrested, he gets charged, he goes on trial. What makes the story, another bizarre twist on it is that Kent Whitaker, who was a shooting victim and also the survivor, the lone survivor of the crime, is actually there supporting his son.
Sure.
To avoid the death penalty, as opposed to saying, that guy did it. Yeah, he's my son, but he killed my family, so I'm sorry to say this, but he needs to die. It was the total opposite. Kent was actually very, very adamant. Even before the case went to trial, they really tried hard. And that's actually a lot of true crime books will kind of rehash the whole story in the trial section.
Sure.
And what I tried to do is a little different on this particular book, is that I only focused on three people. I mean, the actual trial itself, I didn't even really care about, because I've already told you the crime and what had happened.
Right.
So I actually skipped almost all that and went straight to he's guilty, but let's hear from three people that believe differently, that Bart should not be executed. And that was his uncle, which was his mother's brother, Bo Whitaker. His name is Bo, and then Kent Whitaker, who really gave him a lot of pages to really discuss why it was important for him to not have his only living family member executed.
Certainly.
But then I countered it at the end with Bart Whitaker's own testimony. So here you've got these two really, really great, nice men. Bo Whitaker, really, honestly, I don't think gave a rat's lick about Bart, but he didn't believe that his sister would want him executed. Kent, of course, did not want his son executed.
Right.
But then when you actually listen to what Bart says and the arrogance that he continues to display, the braggadocio that he has, it's amazing. And when you actually read what Bart says, you're like, thank God they put this guy on death row.
Sure.
Because it's just the ego that was running so rampant in his world is just phenomenal. And
what I was very curious about, Corey, was though, and we haven't mentioned it, is that what was his fiancée? He was planning to get married to this woman, and a couple months after the murders, he actually asked her to marry her. Tell us a little bit about the fiancée's reaction. Did she have any indication of his real true character? Tell us a little bit about her reaction, and just tell us a little bit about his fiancée, his girlfriend.
Well, let's just say that, first of all, when the word came out that Bart was leaving for Mexico because he was a major suspect in a murder,
right?
Yeah, wedding invitations were recalled, basically. No, his girlfriend at the time, at the time of the murders, really sweet girl, very smart, was going to a different college than him. She was attending University of Texas. He was at Baylor at the time. She came from a very well-to-do family, so obviously had no need for any Whitaker money, because her family actually made a lot more money than the Whitaker family did. And so really this was a very cute, attractive, sweet, smart girl who had fallen in love with this guy, who really thought he was just a sweet, charismatic, congenial fellow who made her feel like a queen. what any person would want in a relationship. And yeah, they had been together for quite a while through college, a long-distance relationship before the murders. And she was actually going to meet up with Bart the day after the murders to meet with her family. She couldn't go out that night because she was seeing her family when she come into town. And at the time, they're still boyfriend and girlfriend, the murders. And of course, she's right there by his side. That after he gets shot, and
sure.
she's the good, loving girlfriend, and she's going to take care of him. And sure enough, as soon as Bart heals and they get kind of back into a flow of life after the murders, Bart and his girlfriend start talking about, let's do this, let's get engaged, let's get married. And he asked her to marry him, and she said yes. And this is all in the interim from the murders before he leaves for Mexico, so that whole 7-month period. And again, just a young woman truly in love with her man. And needless to say, once Bart hightails it, and the way she finds out is that Bart actually wrote a few letters to a few people, one being his girlfriend, one to his father, and one to the family attorney. And at that time, what he said in the letter to Lynn is, I adore you, you're my world, everything about you is fantastic. However, these people think I'm this crazy killer, and I didn't do it, but I've got to go because they think that I did it. So obviously, she's like mortified that her lover, the man she has said I do or is planning on saying I do to, is like I said, the prime suspect in the murder of his own family. And everything from that point for her just shut down. And to this day, she is very pulling the curtains down and doesn't want anybody to know what had happened to her, and doesn't want to talk about it because, mortified, embarrassed, horrified at what her lover could do, and she had no clue. So
yeah, it's crazy.
Tragic all the way around.
Yeah. Now, we've only got about 3 minutes left. I will leave the rest of the book for people that now have been intrigued to buy this book and then read it, because it's a great read. You're a great storyteller, Corey, and this is a crazy story. Like you say, so much black humor. You hate to laugh at it, but it's so absurd. You talk about criminal mastermind. This guy's the exact opposite, if there ever was one. And you did talk a little bit about, just briefly, I want to talk about some of the things that you're doing now, your latest project or projects. But you did say that you thought that the reason for this overall was he was just bored.
Yeah, I really do. I use the almost 100-century-old case or 100-year-old case now of Leopold and Loeb, of the young, rich, bored guys that are trying to commit the ultimate crime. And I really think, I don't think it was money, because Bart was fine. He was doing great financially. I really think he was bored out of his skull, and I think he thought he was smarter than everybody else. And what better way to prove that than kill your entire family and get away with it? And
incredible.
He almost did. He literally almost got away with it.
Incredible.
But amazing he did not. And then, as far as projects go, I'm working on a case now where my killer actually just committed suicide in prison 2 weeks ago.
Wow.
A case here in San Antonio, Texas. A teacher by the name of Diane Tilley was kidnapped, raped, and tortured by a father and daughter team. A gentleman by the name of Ronnie Joe Neal had committed the murder. Just an amazing woman, Diane Tilley, actually founded a school for troubled teens, which ironically would have been perfect for the daughter. She probably would have been a prime candidate for her school. Instead, she ends up killing this woman.
Wow.
And, so that case, I'll be finishing that up this summer, and that'll be my book for Kensington that'll come out next year. And then real excited, I've got a little change of pace. I'm working on I'm actually helping co-author an autobiography for the heavy metal band Pantera and the lead singer Philip Anselmo. Huge metal band for those people that don't know about them. They've sold over 20 million records, played thousands of shows worldwide. We're the first extreme heavy metal band to debut number one on the Billboard charts with an album back in 1994. There's actually even a true crime angle on it where one of the guitar players in the band was shot and murdered on stage. So that's
incredible.
An exciting story for me to be involved in. Very privileged to be involved in that. And then I'm actually co-authoring I call it the Spurned Political Wife memoir of a former wife of a Kentucky legislator who, after he divorced his wife, went on to kill his mistress. So I'll actually be working on that book as well, and co-authoring that with the wife on that case. So I'm just trying something a little different. This Savage Son is my 7th book, and I'm looking for just a little change in life a little bit, but I'll always write true crime books. I just need to take a bit of a step back and try something different for my own interest. And but I think everybody that follows me and knows what I like will enjoy all of those books. So I'm hoping right now, though, that they'll go out and buy Savage Son and enjoy that one, too. So.
Absolutely. It's an incredible story, Corey, and I want to thank you very much for coming on my program and talking about this incredible book. And it was a great interview. Like you say, you're a great natural storyteller, so we've really enjoyed it. I will speak on behalf of the audience and myself. So I want to thank you very much, and good luck with your next project, and hopefully we'll have you on the show in the fall when that comes out, or when it does come out. We'll have you back on the program, talk about that book. It should be good.
Anytime, Dan. It's a pleasure to talk with aspiring true crime authors like you, not only aspiring but published true crime authors like you. And, hey, all my fans out there, too, I want you to check out Dan's work, because he definitely is an up-and-coming voice that we all need to hear and read and go out and support this man, too, because he's doing a great job with this radio program and a great storyteller as well. So right back at you, sir.
Well, thanks very much, Corey. If you ever need a job as a publicist, I got a job for you, so absolutely.
Hey,
okay.
Anytime, bud, anytime.
Okay, well, it's very nice talking to you. Have a great evening, Corey, and thanks very much for coming on the program.
Dan, thanks so much for having me, sir. It was my pleasure, and I look forward to talking to you in the future.
Okay, great. Good night.
Right, you have a great night. Bye-bye.
You too. You've been listening to the program True Murder, the most shocking killers in true crime history, and the authors that have written about them, with your host, Dan Zupansky. See you next time. Good night.